A billionaire took a wrong exit and saw a 9-year-old girl searching for food in a freezing landfill. But when she showed him the drawings in her bag, everything changed. Those sketches weren't dreams, they were evidence. Evidence that an entire neighborhood had been stolen and a powerful city was trying to erase it. I tell people I took the wrong exit. That story sounds clean, like a harmless mistake on a cold day. The truth is messier. I took it because the air in my car felt too perfect after a board meeting where men in tailored suits argued about revitalization and efficiency as if cities were spreadsheets, not homes. Nobody said the word people once, not one time. Outside Newark wore winter like a bruise. Sleet stitched thin lines across my windshield, and the skyline faded into gray smoke and metal. My driver asked if I wanted to head straight back to the office. I said no. My thumb hit the window button like I needed the cold to remind me I was still human. Then the smell hit wet plastic old smoke, something sour that clung to the back of your throat. The landfill. A jagged sea of black bags and broken things, gulls spiraling overhead, like scraps of paper in a windstorm. My car slowed as if it had its own conscience, and at the fence line I saw her. A small girl in an oversized coat, boots too thin for the slush, moving with careful purpose. Not frantic, strategic. She opened bags like she knew which ones lied. She pulled out a crushed bakery box and lifted the lid with the kind of hope that should never have to exist. Empty. Her shoulders dropped, but she didn't cry. She didn't even look surprised. She just, adjusted her grip and tried again. Then, like she felt my stare, she looked up. Big winter blue eyes locked onto mine through the windshield. No fear, no drama, just a silent question that hit harder than any headline. Are you going to pretend you didn't see me? My hand was on the door handle before my brain could calculate risk. The wind slapped my face the second I stepped out, sharp and honest. My driver said "sir" again, like the title could keep me warm. I ignored him and walked across crunching gravel, stopping a few feet away so I wouldn't corner her. The girl tightened her hold on the empty box like it still mattered. Her hair escaped a knit cap in pale, messy strands, damp at the ends. Her cheeks were red from cold, but her eyes stayed steady, too steady for a child. "Hey," I said softly. "You shouldn't be out here." She didn't run. She didn't beg. She studied me the way you study a dog you're not sure will bite. "I'm not hurting anyone," she said. Her voice was small, but it didn't shake. It sounded practiced, like she'd learned early that panic wastes energy. "What's your name?" I asked. She hesitated, then answered like she was handing me a piece of herself she could take back. "Ren." "How old are you, Ren?" "9." "9." The word lodged in my chest. "And you're looking for food?" I said, keeping my tone neutral so I wouldn't sound like judgment. Her chin lifted, a spark of pride under exhaustion. "For us." "Us," I repeated. Her gaze flicked toward a line of leafless trees beyond the service road, quick protective warning me not to follow, but also begging me to understand there was someone else depending on her. I reached for my wallet without thinking, then froze. Cash felt like a transaction, like tipping someone for surviving, like paying a child to disappear. So I did the only thing that didn't feel like an insult. "I'm Mason," I said. "Can I buy you breakfast?" Ren stared at me, then at the landfill, then back at me, measuring the offer like it could be a trap. "Hot?" she asked. That one word cracked something open in me. "Yes," I said. "Hot." She nodded once. Not grateful, not relieved. Just decided. The diner was warm in the way the world should be for kids. Coffee steam, clinking forks, someone laughing in the corner. Ren sat on the edge of the booth as if she didn't trust comfort. She kept her hands in her lap until the food arrived, then ate slowly, eyes flicking up to watch me between bites. I tried not to stare at how carefully she rationed each mouthful, like she didn't believe the plate belonged to her. "Do you go to school?" I asked. "Sometimes," she said, and that single word carried everything she didn't want to explain. When she opened her canvas tote bag, I expected a plastic bottle or a spare glove. Instead, she pulled out folded sheets of paper and smoothed them on the table with the same care she used for food. Drawings. Not childish scribbles, real plans. Straight lines, measured angles, labels in tiny handwriting. A park layout with walking paths. A footbridge positioned where sunlight would land in the morning. Row houses with proper spacing. A community center with wide windows and a roofline designed to catch light. My throat tightened. "Did you draw these?" I asked. Ren nodded like it was nothing. "Where'd you learn?" I asked. "I watch," she said simply. "People build, people break. I remember what they meant to make." I flipped to the next page and went still. It was a sketch of a neighborhood block, street corners, storefront placement, even the crooked sidewalk matching a map I'd seen yesterday and my own board, meeting a redevelopment zone my company had been offered as Phase 2. Except her version had gardens and benches, a playground, a place for families. Our version had luxury condos and private amenities. Ren pushed the drawing toward me and whispered like the words were dangerous. "They took our street." In that moment, I understood something terrifying. This wasn't a child imagining a better city. This was a child documenting a crime one line at a time. Ren didn't lead me straight back to the landfill. She led me away from it past the chain-link fence, down a cracked service road, and into a thin line of leafless trees that bent under the wind like they were trying to hide. The farther we walked, the quieter it got. No traffic, no voices, just the crunch of snow and the soft, steady rhythm of Ren's boots duct-taped at the toes, stubbornly moving forward. Behind the trees sat something that barely deserved to be called a home, plywood sheets patched together like a bad promise. Tarps pulled tight with rope cardboard shoved into gaps, a coffee can chimney coughing out a thin thread of smoke. A woman stepped out before we even reached the door. Late 60s. Strong stance. Eyes that didn't blink first. "Ren," she snapped. "Inside." Ren didn't move. "Grandma Ruth." "He bought breakfast," she said like that alone should earn me 1 ounce of trust. Ruth's stare locked onto me. She didn't look at my coat or my watch. She looked at my posture, my hands, my shoes, like she'd spent decades learning how to read danger quickly. "I'm not here to cause trouble," I said. Ruth let out a laugh so dry it sounded like paper tearing. "Trouble doesn't ask permission." Inside, the air was warmer but heavier soup, damp fabric smoke, and the ache of a life squeezed too tight. A blanket hung like a door between rooms. A single bulb glowed from a cord that ran somewhere it probably shouldn't. Ruth crossed her arms. "You're a businessman." It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. I nodded. Her gaze shifted to Ren's tote bag, those drawings. For half a second, Ruth's face softened like stone, remembering it used to be clay. "She draws what they stole," Ruth said quietly. "So she won't forget." On the way out, I saw the sign. A billboard taller than the trees, bright against the gray sky, like an insult, Cress Urban Partners, reviving the future. Beside the slogan was a smiling face, perfect hair, perfect teeth, the kind of grin you practice in a mirror until it stops being human. Gideon Cress. Ruth followed my eyes and spat into the snow. "That man buys neighborhoods the way people buy coffee." Ren stood close to her grandmother's side, quiet. Her small hand found Ruth's sleeve like an anchor. Ruth's voice dropped. They held a meeting at the community hall. People were scared, but they showed up anyway. Papers were passed around, big words, promises. "What kind of promises?" I asked. "Temporary relocation," Ruth said. "Jobs, better housing. Time." Callahan, Deputy Mayor Callahan, stood there smiling like he was saving us. Ren's jaw tightened at the name. Ruth's eyes narrowed. Then the eviction notices came. Fast, like they'd been printed before we even signed. "And the hall?" I asked. Ruth hesitated, then spoke like she was forcing the memory out. 2 weeks later, it burned. Not a big fire, just enough to destroy records. And wouldn't you know it? The city said the meeting minutes were lost. Wren flinched, and Ruth immediately corrected herself, gentle but firm. Nobody got hurt, she said, as if she needed Wren to hear that part most. But my stomach still tightened. Because in my world, timing like that is never luck. Back in my car, I opened my email from the board meeting. A strategic partnership opportunity with Cress Urban. My name on the distribution list. A neat summary: minimal friction. Maximum return. Minimal friction. I stared at those words until they felt like poison. Sloan Mercer's office was glass and silence high above the city, where problems looked smaller if you kept them far enough away. She didn't stand when I walked in. She didn't smile. She just watched me with the kind of focus that made men lie less. "What do you want, Mason?" she asked. I set Wren's drawings on her desk like evidence, not art. "I want you to look at this." Sloan flipped through the pages. Her expression stayed controlled, but I caught the flicker in her eyes, professional respect mixed with alarm. "These are competent," she said carefully. "She's 9, I replied. Sloan stopped turning pages. I told her the landfill, the shack. Ruth's voice, Wren's eyes, the billboard, the missing meeting minutes. The hall fire that erased what the city didn't want remembered. Sloan leaned back. "Do you know how many people come in here with sad stories and no proof?" I slid one drawing forward. In the corner, in Wren's small handwriting, were 5 words that hit like a siren. "Callahan promised us time." Sloan's jaw tightened. "Deputy Mayor Callahan." I nodded. She stood and walked to the window, staring down at Newark, like she was deciding whether to step into a storm she'd avoided for years. "If this is real," she said quietly, "it's not just civil, it's criminal." "And if we lose?" I asked. Sloan turned back, eyes sharp, voice steady. "Then we make losing expensive," she said. "And we make sure that child's life doesn't become collateral." She tapped Wren's drawings once, like sealing a pact. "Bring me names," Sloan added. "Bring me witnesses. Bring me the truth." I left her office with one clear thought burning through my chest. For the first time, I wasn't buying a solution. I was joining a fight. Sloan didn't believe in dramatic moves. She believed in paperwork. "Fraud leaves fingerprints," she told me the next morning as we sat in a cramped city records office that smelled like dust and burnt coffee. "You just have to find where someone got lazy." Stacks of zoning documents covered the table between us. Deeds, meeting summaries, transfer approvals. Everything looked perfectly clean, stamped and approved. Too clean. Sloan tapped one page with her pen. "See this? What about it?" I asked. "The timeline," she said. "These approvals moved faster than anything in city government has moved in the last 20 years. She leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing, which means someone pushed them. Across the room, Wren sat quietly with a cup of hot chocolate I'd bought her from a vending machine downstairs. She wasn't playing on a phone. She wasn't bored. She was watching. Her gaze moved between the filing cabinets, the clerks, the locked drawers. Then she whispered almost to herself, "They hide things." I looked over. "What do you mean, grown-ups?" she said, tracing her finger around the cup's rim. "They hide things in drawers when they don't want kids to see." Sloan froze. Slowly, she stood up and walked to the archive counter. "Do you have microfilm backups of council meetings from 2 years ago?" she asked the clerk. The woman blinked. "Those are rarely used." Sloan smiled faintly. "That's exactly why I'd like to see them." 30 minutes later, the projector hummed, and suddenly the missing meeting minutes appeared on the screen, old, grainy, but real. One page stopped Sloan cold. At the bottom was a list of signatures, including Ruth Avery's name. But the signature underneath didn't match the one Wren had shown us in her grandmother's notebook. Sloan leaned closer to the screen. that she said quietly is a forgery. Across the room, Wren lifted her head, like she'd just heard the truth finally speak. 2 days later, Gideon Kress stood in front of cameras, wearing a navy coat and the kind of calm smile money buys. Snow drifted down behind him, while reporters held microphones toward his polished voice. "Urban renewal is about giving families a better future," he said smoothly. I watched the live stream from Sloane's office. Wren sat beside me, legs swinging above the floor. When Gideon stepped aside, the deputy mayor appeared behind him. Wren's feet stopped moving. "That's him," she said quietly. "Callahan?" I asked. She nodded. "He was at the meeting," she said. "He told everyone we had time to move." "What happened after?" I asked gently. Her eyes dropped to the carpet. "The next week there were notices on the doors," she said. "Grandma said we had to leave." On the screen, Gideon kept talking about community investment. Sloane muted the television with a sharp click. "They're getting ahead of us," she said. "How?" I asked. "They know something's coming," she replied. "So they're building a public story first." Wren looked up at the paused image of Gideon Kress, smiling. "He didn't look at people," she said softly. "He looked past them." Sloane folded her arms. "We file for an injunction," she said. "If we move fast, we can freeze demolition until the court reviews the case." "And if we don't?" I asked. Sloane's expression hardened. "Then the buildings disappear," she said. "And once something is gone, the law has a funny way of pretending it never mattered." Wren stared at her drawings spread across the desk. Her fingers hovered over the park she'd sketched. "I remember everything," she whispered. Sloane looked down at her. "Good," she said quietly. "Because memory," Sloane added, "is exactly what they're afraid of." The legal letter arrived the next morning. Heavy paper, expensive envelope, the kind of stationery that tries to intimidate before you even open it. Sloane read it once and dropped it on the table. "Cease and desist," she said. I scanned the page. Defamation, interference, threats of civil liability. Gideon Kress's lawyers were warning me to stop investigating the redevelopment project or face personal lawsuits. "They're trying to scare you," Sloane said calmly. I looked up. "Will it work?" She tilted her head. "That depends." "Do you scare easily?" I thought about the landfill, about a 9-year-old girl lifting empty bakery boxes from trash bags. "No," I said quietly. In the next room, Wren sat cross-legged on the carpet drawing again. Her pencil moved in quick, precise lines. I walked over and sat beside her. "What are you working on?" I asked. She turned the paper toward me. It was the same neighborhood map, but bigger this time. More detail. A playground. Trees. A small bridge crossing a shallow creek. "This is what it used to look like," she said. Then she pointed to a blank square in the middle. "And this is where the community hall was." Her finger lingered there for a moment. "Do you think they'll give it back?" she asked. I looked at the empty space on the page. Then I looked at the legal letter in my hand. And I understood something important. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about whether a child's memory could stand up against a billionaire's power. I folded the letter slowly. "They're going to try to stop us," I told her. Wren nodded like she already knew that. Then she looked up at me with those steady blue eyes. "Are we stopping?" she asked. I shook my head. "No," I said. And for the first time since I met her, Wren smiled. The hardest part of proving the truth wasn't the paperwork. It was the people. Sloane said the same thing the moment we left the courthouse after filing the injunction. "Documents show intent," she said, "but witnesses show harm. So we went looking for the neighborhood, not the buildings, the people who used to live in them." What we found instead were fragments. A barber who now worked in a strip mall 2 towns away. A teacher living in a 1-room apartment above a laundromat. A retired mechanic staying with his daughter after his house was condemned. The redevelopment project had scattered them like leaves in a storm. The first door we knocked on almost closed in our faces. Another developer, the woman snapped, before she saw Ren standing behind me. Ren stepped forward slowly. "I used to live near you," she said quietly, "by the mural with the yellow sun." The woman froze. For a moment, she just stared. Then her shoulders dropped. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You're Ruth's granddaughter." That was the moment the wall cracked. Inside her living room, the story came out in pieces. The meeting at the community hall, the papers they were told to sign, the promises that sounded too good but came too fast. "They said it was temporary," the woman said. "They said we'd come back to better homes." Her voice broke. Then the eviction notices showed up 3 days later. Ren sat on the couch hugging her tote bag. She didn't interrupt. She just listened, and one by one other residents started talking too. The mechanic remembered Callahan shaking hands. The barber remembered security guards showing up the next morning. Someone else remembered the fire alarm at the hall 2 weeks later, and how the building was suddenly closed for safety inspection. Sloan wrote everything down, every date, every name, every detail. When we left that apartment, Ren walked beside me quietly. "Do you think the judge will believe them?" she asked. I looked down at her small boots, stepping carefully through the snow. "I think," I said slowly, "truth gets stronger every time someone refuses to forget it." Ren nodded, like she'd been carrying that responsibility alone for a long time. The next battle wasn't in a courtroom. It was in my own company. The boardroom felt colder than the winter outside. 12 executives sat around the table, their expressions careful but tense. One of them slid a document toward me. "Our stock dropped 3% this morning," he said. Another leaned forward. "Your involvement in this dispute with Cress Urban is creating unnecessary exposure." I glanced at the screen behind them. A news headline glowed across the financial channels. "Tech Billionaire investigates controversial redevelopment deal." My name sat underneath. "This isn't exposure," I said calmly. "It's accountability." A director shook his head. "Mason, this project was supposed to be a strategic partnership. Instead, you're publicly accusing another firm of fraud." "Not accusing," I corrected. "Investigating." Another voice cut in. "And involving a child." The room went quiet. I felt anger rise in my chest, slow and controlled. "That child," I said carefully, "lost her home because people in this city abused power." Someone sighed. "Mason, you're emotional." That word again. Emotional. Like empathy was a flaw. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table. "You all talk about building the future," I said. "But what kind of future bulldozes the people who already live in it?" No one answered. Finally, the chairman spoke. "If this continues," he said, "Cress Urban may sue you personally." I held his gaze. "Then let them." Silence fell across the room. Because for the first time since founding my company, I wasn't negotiating. I was drawing a line. Later that night, I came home to find Ren sitting at my kitchen island, her drawings spread across the marble surface. She looked up as I walked in. "Did you win?" she asked. I smiled a little. "No," I said. "We just started the fight." The courthouse was built to make people feel small. Tall ceilings, cold marble floors, echoes that swallowed voices. Ren held Ruth's hand as we walked through security, her eyes moving across the room with quiet curiosity. "Why is it so big?" she whispered. "So people remember the law is bigger than them," Sloan said gently. Ruth had braided Ren's hair that morning, tying the end with a blue ribbon. "So they see a child," she'd said, "not a headline." Inside the courtroom, Gideon Cress sat with his legal team. Perfect suit, perfect posture, perfect confidence. He didn't look at us, like we weren't worth the effort. Sloan stood when the judge entered. "Your Honor," she began, "we request an injunction to halt demolition of the Avery District redevelopment zone until allegations of fraud are fully reviewed." Kress's attorney rose immediately. "These claims are baseless," he said smoothly. "The plaintiffs are disgruntled former residents encouraged by a competing developer." He gestured toward me. "And unfortunately, a child is being used here for emotional leverage." Wren stiffened. My fists tightened under the table. But Sloane didn't react. She simply placed the microfilm copy on the evidence stand. "This document," she said, "shows a forged signature on a legally binding property transfer." The judge leaned forward. "Forgery is a serious allegation," she said. Sloane nodded. "And we believe it is part of a larger pattern involving coercive signatures and the destruction of meeting records." The courtroom grew very quiet. Judge Marquez studied both sides for a long moment. Finally, she spoke. "I am granting a temporary injunction," she said. "Demolition will pause for 2 weeks while this court reviews the evidence." A ripple moved through the room. Not victory, but breathing space. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. Wren squeezed my hand. "Why are they taking pictures?" she asked. "Because this story matters," I said. She frowned slightly. "I don't want to be a story," she said. I knelt beside her. "You're not," I said softly. "You're the reason the story is finally being told. 2 weeks sounds like a long time. In court, it isn't. 2 weeks is barely enough time to organize files, much less dismantle a carefully hidden fraud." But Sloane worked like time itself owed her money. Every morning began before sunrise in her office. Coffee cups piled up beside stacks of documents. Legal pads filled with arrows, names, and timelines. Investigators came and went carrying folders that felt heavier than paper. And through it all, Wren sat quietly in the corner chair with her sketchbook. Drawing. Always drawing. One afternoon, while Sloane and I were buried in property records, Wren slid a page across the desk. It was the community hall. Not the burned version, the way it used to look. Brick steps, 2 oak trees outside the entrance. A crooked sign that read, "Welcome Neighbors." "You remember all this?" Sloane asked gently. Wren shrugged. "I count things," she said. "What kind of things, people?" Wren replied. "Chairs, windows. When you're poor, you notice patterns." That sentence landed heavier than anything we'd found in paperwork. Later that night, Sloane called me at 1:12 a.m. Her voice carried a kind of controlled excitement I'd never heard before. "Mason," she said, "we found something." "What kind of something?" "A backup reel." I sat up immediately. "Microfilm," she explained. "A retired city archivist kept copies of council meeting records at home. Said he never trusted the digital system." And Sloane took a slow breath. "The original minutes from the community hall meeting are on the reel." My heart started beating faster. "What do they show?" "They show the meeting never approved forced relocation." I froze. Instead, she continued, "The residents voted for a review period before any redevelopment decisions." Meaning, Sloane said carefully, "those signatures were collected under false pretenses." I closed my eyes for a second. Outside my window, the city was quiet lights glowing across the skyline like distant stars. In the living room, Wren slept on the couch with her sketchbook tucked under her arm. I walked over and looked down at her. For weeks, she had carried the memory of something everyone else insisted had never existed. Now the proof was finally speaking. I picked up the phone again. "What happens next?" I asked. Sloane's voice sharpened with purpose. "Now we prove it wasn't just deception," she said. "We prove it was a plan." The invitation arrived the next morning. A simple message from Gideon Kress's office. Lunch, private table. Noon. Sloane frowned when I told her. "That's not a social invitation," she said. "That's strategy." "Good," I replied. The restaurant Gideon chose overlooked the river glass walls, polished wood, the kind of place where waiters moved silently like ghosts. Gideon stood when I approached the table. Tall, perfect suit. Smile calibrated down to the millimeter. "Mason Vale," he said warmly. I was wondering when we'd finally meet. I didn't return the smile. You already knew who I was. Of course, Gideon said lightly. You're the man disrupting my redevelopment project. He poured water like we were old friends. I prefer to think of it as correcting a mistake, I said. Gideon chuckled softly. Cities are messy, he said. Sometimes progress requires difficult adjustments. Is that what you call forcing families out of their homes? His smile didn't fade. I call it investment. I slid Ren's drawing across the table. The park, the bridge, the small neighborhood exactly as she imagined it. Gideon glanced at it for less than 2 seconds. A child's fantasy, he said. No, I replied quietly. It's a memory. For the first time, Gideon's eyes sharpened. You're risking a great deal for a sentimental story, he said. Am I? He leaned back. Mason, let's be honest. The courts will take months, years maybe. Meanwhile, the land sits idle, investors grow impatient. And I'm offering you an exit. What kind a donation to a children's foundation in that girl's name, he said smoothly. Scholarships, positive press. You walk away looking like a hero. I stared at him. You think this is about publicity? Gideon shrugged. Everything is. I folded Ren's drawing carefully. She's 9 years old, I said, and she remembers the truth better than half this city. Gideon leaned forward slightly. Truth, he said, is what the system decides survives. The sentence hung in the air like cold smoke. I stood up slowly. You're wrong, I said. Oh yes, because the system, I added quietly, just met someone it can't intimidate. Gideon watched me walk away. His smile returned, but his eyes didn't. That night, Ruth Avery asked if we could talk. The kitchen felt warmer than usual. The smell of soup filled the air, and Ren sat at the table coloring quietly, while Ruth and I moved into the small living room. Ruth held a mug between her hands like it was the only steady thing in the room. There's something I didn't tell you, she said. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had been deciding for weeks whether to speak. What is it? I asked. Ruth stared at the floor for a long moment before answering. I used to clean offices downtown, she said. That's not unusual. One of them belonged to Deputy Mayor Callahan. That made me straighten. Ruth nodded slowly. I wasn't supposed to notice anything, she continued. But when you spend your life cleaning other people's messes, you start paying attention. What did you see? Envelopes, she said. Maps. Lists of property lots. Her voice dropped. And I heard them talking. Who? Callahan? And a man named Gideon. My chest tightened. They said the neighborhood would be cleared faster if residents signed the papers without questions, Ruth continued. What kind of papers? Transfer agreements. And the residents didn't understand them. They thought they were signing attendance forms for the meeting, Ruth said. The room went very quiet. Did anyone else hear this? I asked. Ruth shook her head slowly. No. But you're sure I've lived long enough to know what greed sounds like, she replied. Then she reached into her pocket and placed something on the table. A small metal key. What's this? I asked. The community hall basement storage, Ruth said. My pulse jumped. I thought the hall burned down. It did, she said. But the basement survived. And Ruth looked toward the kitchen, where Ren hummed softly while drawing. They boarded it up after the fire, Ruth whispered. But nobody knew I kept a copy of the key. I picked it up carefully. If records were stored down there, they might still be there, Ruth finished. A possibility opened in my mind. Meeting logs, sign-in sheets, anything proving what really happened that night. You're telling me the evidence might still exist? Ruth nodded. For 2 years, I've been afraid to check, she admitted. Why? Because if I was wrong, she said quietly, it would mean we lost everything for nothing. From the kitchen, Ren suddenly called out. Grandma Ruth stood and walked in. "What is it?" Baby Wren held up a new drawing. The community hall again. But this time she had added something underneath it. A staircase leading down. "Did the basement look like this?" she asked. Ruth stared at the drawing. Then she slowly nodded. "Yes," she whispered. Wren smiled. "I remember," she said. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. While the city had been trying to erase the past, a 9-year-old girl had been quietly preserving it. We went before sunrise. Sloane insisted on it. "Less attention," she said. "Less traffic, less curiosity." The winter sky over Newark was still dark when we parked near the old Avery district. The streets were quiet in that strange hour when the city hasn't decided whether to wake up yet. A cold wind pushed through the empty blocks where houses used to stand. Ruth held the metal key tightly in her gloved hand. For 2 years she had carried it without using it. Now it felt like a question she had finally decided to answer. Wren walked beside her grandmother, clutching her canvas tote bag. The same bag filled with drawings, maps of a neighborhood the city claimed had never really existed. I followed behind them with Sloane. The community hall stood at the far end of the block, or what was left of it. The building looked like a skeleton, blackened brick walls, broken windows, and a roof that had partially collapsed during the fire. A temporary construction fence surrounded the property, but a section of it had fallen inward where the metal had rusted. Sloane glanced around the empty street. "No security," she said quietly. "Good." Ruth pushed open the bent fence and stepped through. The snow crunched loudly under our shoes as we approached the building. Standing in front of it felt strange. For Wren, it was clearly a place full of memories. For me, it was a crime scene that had been left to rot. "Is this how it looked?" I asked gently. Wren nodded slowly. "The meeting was upstairs," she said. Grandma sat near the front. Her voice carried a kind of careful calm, like she was replaying the memory in her mind, one detail at a time. Sloane walked along the side of the building until she found a metal door half hidden behind debris. "Basement entrance," she said. Ruth stepped forward and lifted the key. For a moment she hesitated. 2 years of fear hung in the air between us. "What if there's nothing down there?" she whispered. Wren looked up at her. "Then we still know the truth," the girl said quietly. Ruth nodded once, then she slid the key into the lock. It turned. The door opened with a long, rusty groan. Cold air rolled out from the darkness below. I switched on the flashlight from my phone and the beam cut through the dust. Concrete stairs led down into a basement that smelled like damp wood and smoke. We moved carefully. The fire above had never reached the lower level completely. The walls were stained and debris covered the floor, but most of the room still stood intact. Shelves lined the far wall. Old folding chairs were stacked in a corner. A few metal cabinets leaned against the concrete like tired soldiers. Sloane walked slowly across the room, sweeping her flashlight back and forth. If any records survived, she said they'd be in storage. Wren crouched near the floor, studying the layout. Her eyes moved across the room like she was comparing it to the drawing in her mind. Then she pointed. "There." We followed her finger. Half buried under a fallen wooden beam sat a large metal filing cabinet. Its paint was scorched, but the doors were still closed. My heart started beating faster. "Help me move this," I said. Sloane and I lifted the beam enough for Ruth to drag it aside. The cabinet groaned when I pulled on the handle. For a second, nothing happened. Then the metal latch snapped open. Inside were rows of folders, perfectly dry. Sloane grabbed the nearest one and flipped it open. Her eyes widened instantly. "Sign-in sheets," she said. Ruth stepped closer. Her hands began shaking. "Those are the meeting records," she whispered. Page after page listed residents who attended the community meeting. Names, addresses, signatures, real ones. At the very back of the cabinet sat a thick binder sealed inside a plastic sleeve. Sloane opened it carefully. Inside was the official agenda from the night of the meeting, and taped to the last page was a note written in blue pen: collect signatures tonight, relocation approval needed immediately. Sloane exhaled slowly. This proves coercion, she said. Wren stared at the binder like she was looking at something sacred. For 2 years, she said softly, everyone kept saying the meeting never happened. I knelt beside her. Well, I said quietly, now we know it did. Ruth wiped her eyes. I thought we lost everything, she whispered. Wren shook her head. No, she said. We just hadn't found it yet. Sloane closed the binder and looked at me. This changes the case completely, she said. Above us, the morning sun began creeping through the broken windows of the hall. For the first time since the fight began, I felt something stronger than hope. Evidence. Real evidence. And somewhere across the city, Gideon Kress had no idea the ground beneath his empire had just cracked open. The news spread faster than we expected. By the time we left the courthouse that afternoon, 3 television vans were already parked across the street. Reporters clustered near the entrance like birds waiting for crumbs. Someone had leaked the story about the basement records. Sloane wasn't surprised. When power feels threatened, she said quietly, as we walked down the courthouse steps, it reacts. Wren stayed close beside Ruth, her small hand wrapped around her grandmother's sleeve. Camera flashes popped like tiny bursts of lightning. A reporter shouted, Mr. Vale, is it true you found new evidence? Another voice followed. Is the city involved in a fraud investigation? Sloane raised her hand slightly. No statements today, she said calmly, but the questions kept coming. Is that the girl from the redevelopment district, Wren? Can you tell us what happened to your home? Wren's grip tightened. She pressed closer to Ruth. I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest. They didn't see a child. They saw a headline. We pushed through the crowd and reached the car. The door shut behind us, cutting off the noise like a curtain dropping after a play. Inside, silence filled the vehicle. Wren stared out the window as the courthouse disappeared behind us. Why are they asking so many questions? She asked softly. Because they want answers, I said. She looked down at her hands. But I already told the truth. Ruth gently brushed a strand of hair away from Wren's face. That doesn't always stop people from asking again, she said. Back at Sloane's office, the television was already broadcasting the story. A headline crawled across the screen, New Evidence Found in Controversial Redevelopment Case. But the next segment came even faster. Deputy Mayor Callahan stood behind a podium in City Hall. We take allegations seriously, he said smoothly. However, early reports suggest that certain individuals may be misinterpreting unrelated documents. Sloane muted the television with a sharp click. Classic, she said. What does that mean? I asked. It means they're preparing to discredit the evidence before the court reviews it. My phone buzzed. Another news alert. Then another. Then an email from my CFO. Investors are concerned. This situation is escalating. I stared at the screen for a moment before setting the phone down. Across the room, Wren sat at the table drawing again. Her pencil moved slowly across the paper. What are you drawing now? I asked. She turned the page toward me. It was the same neighborhood, but this time the park she had drawn earlier was larger. More trees, more paths, more light. I'm fixing it, she said quietly. Sloane looked over her shoulder. Fixing what? Wren pointed to the center of the drawing, the part where everyone left. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Sloane folded her arms and looked toward the dark television screen. They think this is a media problem, she said. I glanced at the binder of basement evidence on her desk. It isn't, I replied. It's a legal one. And soon the whole city was going to find out. The courthouse felt different the second time. Not quieter, heavier. Word had spread across the city, and the hallway outside the courtroom was crowded long before the doors opened. Reporters stood near the entrance, whispering into microphones. Residents from the old Avery district sat together on the wooden benches, their faces tight with the kind of hope people are afraid to feel too strongly. Inside the courtroom, the air felt sharp. Judge Elena Marquez entered with the same calm authority as before, but this time the room leaned forward when she took her seat. "Counsel," she said, glancing toward both legal teams, "we are here to review the newly discovered materials related to the Avery district redevelopment." Sloan stood first. "Your Honor," she said, placing the binder from the basement onto the evidence table. These records were recovered from the storage archive beneath the community hall. They include meeting attendance sheets, original agenda documents, and handwritten notes confirming that the residents never approved forced relocation. The opposing attorney rose immediately. "We object," he said smoothly. "These documents were discovered outside official channels and may have been tampered with." Sloan didn't flinch. "The documents were preserved in sealed storage and include verifiable signatures from multiple residents present in the courtroom today," she replied. Judge Marquez leaned forward slightly. "Proceed." Sloan opened the binder and held up the meeting agenda. "This page," she said, "contains a handwritten directive instructing organizers to collect signatures even if residents hesitated. That instruction contradicts the city's claim that the meeting authorized redevelopment." The courtroom murmured. Across the aisle, Gideon Kress sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Sloan continued. "In addition, the original meeting minutes recovered from microfilm confirm that the residents voted only to begin a review period before any redevelopment decisions." Judge Marquez turned toward the defense. "Counsel," she said, "do you dispute the authenticity of these records?" The attorney hesitated for half a second before answering. "We believe the interpretation is incomplete." Before the judge could respond, a small voice spoke quietly from the gallery. "I remember that meeting." Every head in the room turned. Wren had stood up. Ruth gently tried to pull her back, but Wren stepped forward into the aisle. She looked small under the tall courtroom ceiling, but her voice didn't shake. "My grandma sat in the second row," she said. There were folding chairs and a long table with papers. Judge Marquez regarded her carefully. "Young lady," she said, "you are not required to testify today." Wren nodded. "I know," she said softly. She glanced toward the binder on the evidence table. "But I remember them saying we had time." The courtroom fell completely silent. For 2 years, the city had insisted that meeting never truly mattered. Now a 9-year-old girl had reminded everyone that it did. Judge Marquez slowly closed the binder and looked toward both legal teams. "Based on the evidence presented today," she said, "this court is extending the injunction and ordering full discovery into the redevelopment process." A ripple moved through the room. Not victory, but momentum. Beside me, Wren quietly returned to her seat. Her hands rested in her lap, calm again, as if speaking the truth had been the simplest thing in the world. Discovery is where lawsuits stop being stories and start becoming facts. For weeks after the second hearing, Sloan's office turned into something that felt halfway between a war room and an archive. Boxes arrived from the city records department. Hard drives full of emails were delivered by courier. Legal assistants moved through the halls carrying stacks of documents that seemed to grow taller every day. Somewhere inside all that paper, the truth was hiding. We just had to find it. One afternoon, Sloan called me into her office. "You should see this," she said. Her computer screen displayed a spreadsheet pulled from Kress Urban's internal files. Rows of addresses filled the screen, each one belonging to a home in the Avery district. But the column headings made my stomach tighten. Lot value, clearance, priority, relocation, status, people's homes reduced to numbers. "Look here," Sloan said, scrolling down. Beside several addresses was another column labeled resistance level. I leaned closer. "What does that mean?" "It means they tracked which families were likely to refuse relocation," Sloan replied. My jaw tightened, and then Sloan opened another file. An email thread appeared on the screen. "From Gideon Kress to Deputy Mayor Callahan. The message was short. Make sure the signatures are finalized. We cannot afford delays before Phase 2. Below it was Callahan's reply. Understood. We'll make the process smoother. I exhaled slowly. That's not just pressure, I said. No, Sloan replied. That's coordination. Across the room, Wren sat on the floor with her sketchbook. She had been unusually quiet that afternoon, listening to the soft clicking of keyboards and the rustling of papers. What are you drawing? I asked. She held up the page. It was the Avery district again, but this time the houses were labeled with the names of the people we had interviewed. Mrs. Alvarez, Mr. Donnelly, the Jackson family. You remember all of them? I asked. Wren nodded. They were our neighbors. Her pencil moved slowly as she added a tree beside one of the houses. Everyone keeps saying the neighborhood disappeared, she said. But it didn't. I looked at the spreadsheet glowing on Sloan's monitor. In the developer's records, the neighborhood was nothing more than a list of properties. But on Wren's page, it was still alive. Sloan leaned back in her chair. With this email chain, she said, we can prove that Cress urban and city officials coordinated the relocation strategy. And the forged signatures, I asked. They become part of a larger pattern, she said. A pattern of pressure, of deception, of a neighborhood pushed aside because it stood in the way of profit. I looked at the wall of documents surrounding us. For 2 years, the city had claimed everything happened legally. Now the evidence told a very different story, and soon the courtroom would hear it. By the time the final hearing arrived, the courthouse was packed. Residents from the Avery district filled the back rows. Reporters lined the walls. The tension in the room felt thick enough to touch. At the center of it all sat Gideon Cress. He looked exactly the same as he had the day I met him at lunch, perfect suit, calm posture, confidence polished like glass. The kind of man who believed the world bent naturally in his direction. When his name was called, he stood and walked to the witness stand without hesitation. Sloan rose slowly. Mr. Cress, she began. You've testified that your company followed all legal procedures during the redevelopment of the Avery district. Is that correct? Yes, Gideon said smoothly. Sloan clicked a button on the screen beside the judge. The email from Discovery appeared. Make sure the signatures are finalized. We cannot afford delays before Phase 2. The courtroom shifted. Sloan folded her hands calmly. Is this your message, Mr. Cress? Gideon glanced at the screen. It appears to be, he replied. And when you say finalized, what exactly did you mean? Gideon smiled faintly. Standard project management language. Sloan nodded as if she expected that answer. Then she opened another document, the spreadsheet listing residence and resistance levels. Your company categorized families by something called resistance level, she said. Why? Gideon paused for a fraction of a second. To understand community feedback, he answered. Sloan stepped closer to the witness stand. Or, she said quietly, to identify which residents needed the most pressure. The courtroom fell silent. From the gallery, Wren watched without blinking. For the first time since the trial began, Gideon Cress's confidence flickered. Just slightly, but enough, because everyone in the room felt it. The moment power realized it was losing control. The ruling came on a quiet Thursday morning. Snow drifted softly outside the courthouse windows while everyone inside waited in complete silence. The room felt smaller than before, even though nothing had changed. Judge Elena Marquez looked down at the documents stacked before her. For a long moment, the only sound in the courtroom was the turning of a single page. Then she spoke. The evidence presented during discovery establishes a pattern of coercion, fraudulent documentation, and improper coordination between private developers and city officials, she said calmly. Across the aisle, Gideon Cress sat perfectly still. Judge Marquez continued. The redevelopment process in the Avery district violated both municipal law and the rights of its residents. A quiet ripple moved through the courtroom. not cheering, just relief. This court therefore rules that the redevelopment approvals are invalid, the judge said. All demolition and construction related to the project are permanently halted, pending a full city review and restitution plan. Ruth squeezed Wren's shoulder. For the first time since the trial began, her hands were shaking. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered again, but this time the atmosphere felt different. The story wasn't about a lawsuit anymore. It was about a neighborhood that refused to disappear. Wren stood beside me near the courthouse steps, holding her sketchbook against her chest. One of the reporters called out, "Wren, what are you going to do now?" She thought for a moment. Then she opened the sketchbook and showed the page she had drawn weeks earlier. The park, the bridge, the trees. "This," she said simply. A year later, that same drawing hung on a small plaque at the entrance of a new public park built on the land where the Avery district once stood. The plaque read, "Wren Avery Park," designed from the drawings of a girl who refused to forget. Wren looked up at me that morning as children ran across the grass. "It finally looks like the picture," she said. And for the first time in a long while, the city looked like it was listening. Did this story touch your heart? Let us know how you felt. Rate it from 1 to 10 in the comments below. If it moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Don't forget to tap the bell so you never miss our next heartfelt story. Click the end screen to watch more emotional journeys. See you in the next one.